The new god of fearfulness. The new gods of fearfulness. The new god of fearfulness. The new goddess of fearfulness. The new goddesses of fearfulness. The new goddess of fearfulness. The old god of fearfulness. The old gods of fearfulness. The old god of fearfulness. The old goddess of fearfulness. The old goddesses of fearfulness. The old goddess of fearfulness. The greater god of fearfulness. The greater gods of fearfulness. The greater god of fearfulness. The greater goddess of fearfulness. The greater goddesses of fearfulness. The greater goddess of fearfulness. The lesser god of fearfulness. The lesser gods of fearfulness. The lesser god of fearfulness. The lesser goddess of fearfulness. The lesser goddesses of fearfulness. The lesser goddess of fearfulness. The higher god of fearfulness. The higher gods of fearfulness. The higher god of fearfulness. The higher goddess of fearfulness. The higher goddesses of fearfulness. The higher goddess of fearfulness. The lower god of fearfulness. The lower gods of fearfulness. The lower god of fearfulness. The lower goddess of fearfulness. The lower goddesses of fearfulness. The lower goddess of fearfulness. The greater spirit of fearfulness. The greater spirits of fearfulness. The greater spirit of fearfulness. The lesser spirit of fearfulness. The lesser spirits of fearfulness. The lesser spirit of fearfulness. The higher spirit of fearfulness. The higher spirits of fearfulness. The higher spirit of fearfulness. The lower spirit of fearfulness. The lower spirits of fearfulness. The lower spirit of fearfulness. The major god of fearfulness. The major gods of fearfulness. The major god of fearfulness. The major goddess of fearfulness. The major goddesses of fearfulness. The major goddess of fearfulness. The minor god of fearfulness. The minor gods of fearfulness. The minor god of fearfulness. The minor goddess of fearfulness. The minor goddesses of fearfulness. The minor goddess of fearfulness. The superior god of fearfulness. The superior gods of fearfulness. The superior god of fearfulness. The superior goddess of fearfulness. The superior goddesses of fearfulness. The superior goddess of fearfulness. The inferior god of fearfulness. The inferior gods of fearfulness. The inferior god of fearfulness. The inferior goddess of fearfulness. The inferior goddesses of fearfulness. The inferior goddess of fearfulness. The ancestor god of fearfulness. The ancestor gods of fearfulness. The ancestor god of fearfulness. The ancestor goddess of fearfulness. The ancestor goddesses of fearfulness. The ancestor goddess of fearfulness. The ascendant god of fearfulness. The ascendant gods of fearfulness. The ascendant god of fearfulness. The ascendant goddess of fearfulness. The ascendant goddesses of fearfulness. The ascendant goddess of fearfulness. The descendant god of fearfulness. The descendant gods of fearfulness. The descendant god of fearfulness. The descendant goddess of fearfulness. The descendant goddesses of fearfulness. The descendant goddess of fearfulness. The transcendent god of fearfulness. The transcendent gods of fearfulness. The transcendent god of fearfulness. The transcendent goddess of fearfulness. The transcendent goddesses of fearfulness. The transcendent goddess of fearfulness. The past god of fearfulness. The past gods of fearfulness. The past god of fearfulness. The past goddess of fearfulness. The past goddesses of fearfulness. The past goddess of fearfulness. The present god of fearfulness. The present gods of fearfulness. The present god of fearfulness. The present goddess of fearfulness. The present goddesses of fearfulness. The present goddess of fearfulness. The future god of fearfulness. The future gods of fearfulness. The future god of fearfulness. The future goddess of fearfulness. The future goddesses of fearfulness. The future goddess of fearfulness. The authentic god of fearfulness. The authentic gods of fearfulness. The authentic god of fearfulness. The authentic goddess of fearfulness. The authentic goddesses of fearfulness. The authentic goddess of fearfulness. The synthetic god of fearfulness. The synthetic gods of fearfulness. The synthetic god of fearfulness. The synthetic goddess of fearfulness. The synthetic goddesses of fearfulness. The synthetic goddess of fearfulness. The progressive god of fearfulness. The progressive gods of fearfulness. The progressive god of fearfulness. The progressive goddess of fearfulness. The progressive goddesses of fearfulness. The progressive goddess of fearfulness. The regressive god of fearfulness. The regressive gods of fearfulness. The regressive god of fearfulness. The regressive goddess of fearfulness. The regressive goddesses of fearfulness. The regressive goddess of fearfulness. The ordinary god of fearfulness. The ordinary gods of fearfulness. The ordinary god of fearfulness. The ordinary goddess of fearfulness. The ordinary goddesses of fearfulness. The ordinary goddess of fearfulness. The extraordinary god of fearfulness. The extraordinary gods of fearfulness. The extraordinary god of fearfulness. The extraordinary goddess of fearfulness. The extraordinary goddesses of fearfulness. The extraordinary goddess of fearfulness. The static god of fearfulness. The static gods of fearfulness. The static god of fearfulness. The static goddess of fearfulness. The static goddesses of fearfulness. The static goddess of fearfulness. The dynamic god of fearfulness. The dynamic gods of fearfulness. The dynamic god of fearfulness. The dynamic goddess of fearfulness. The dynamic goddesses of fearfulness. The dynamic goddess of fearfulness. The land god of fearfulness. The land gods of fearfulness. The land god of fearfulness. The land goddess of fearfulness. The land goddesses of fearfulness. The land goddess of fearfulness. The sea god of fearfulness. The sea gods of fearfulness. The sea god of fearfulness. The sea goddess of fearfulness. The sea goddesses of fearfulness. The sea goddess of fearfulness. The sky god of fearfulness. The sky gods of fearfulness. The sky god of fearfulness. The sky goddess of fearfulness. The sky goddesses of fearfulness. The sky goddess of fearfulness. The god of fearfulness. The gods of fearfulness. The god of fearfulness. The goddess of fearfulness. The goddesses of fearfulness. The goddess of fearfulness. The half god of fearfulness. The half gods of fearfulness. The half god of fearfulness. The half goddess of fearfulness. The half goddesses of fearfulness. The half goddess of fearfulness. The vessel of fearfulness. The vessels of fearfulness. The vessel of fearfulness. The name of fearfulness. The names of fearfulness. The name of fearfulness. The person of fearfulness. The persons of fearfulness. The person of fearfulness. The persona of fearfulness. The personas of fearfulness. The persona of fearfulness. The personage of fearfulness. The personages of fearfulness. The personage of fearfulness. The personality of fearfulness. The personalities of fearfulness. The personality of fearfulness. The personification of fearfulness. The personifications of fearfulness. The personification of fearfulness. The image of fearfulness. The images of fearfulness. The image of fearfulness. The imagination of fearfulness. The imaginations of fearfulness. The imagination of fearfulness. The belief of fearfulness. The beliefs of fearfulness. The belief of fearfulness. The thought of fearfulness. The thoughts of fearfulness. The thought of fearfulness. The word of fearfulness. The words of fearfulness. The word of fearfulness. The action of fearfulness. The actions of fearfulness. The action of fearfulness. The reaction of fearfulness. The reactions of fearfulness. The reaction of fearfulness. The feeling of fearfulness. The feelings of fearfulness. The feeling of fearfulness. The situation of fearfulness. The situations of fearfulness. The situation of fearfulness. The circumstance of fearfulness. The circumstances of fearfulness. The circumstance of fearfulness. The environment of fearfulness. The environments of fearfulness. The environment of fearfulness. The relationship of fearfulness. The relationships of fearfulness. The relationship of fearfulness. The number of fearfulness. The numbers of fearfulness. The number of fearfulness. The formula of fearfulness. The formulas of fearfulness. The formula of fearfulness. The equation of fearfulness. The equations of fearfulness. The equation of fearfulness. The theory of fearfulness. The theories of fearfulness. The theory of fearfulness. The symbol of fearfulness. The symbols of fearfulness. The symbol of fearfulness. The color of fearfulness. The colors of fearfulness. The color of fearfulness. The thing of fearfulness. The things of fearfulness. The thing of fearfulness. The way of fearfulness. The ways of fearfulness. The way of fearfulness. The place of fearfulness. The places of fearfulness. The place of fearfulness. The time of fearfulness. The times of fearfulness. The time of fearfulness. The event of fearfulness. The events of fearfulness. The event of fearfulness. The result of fearfulness. The results of fearfulness. The result of fearfulness. The crown of fearfulness. The crowns of fearfulness. The crown of fearfulness. The throne of fearfulness. The thrones of fearfulness. The throne of fearfulness. The fearfulness king. The fearfulness kings. The fearfulness kingdom. The fearfulness kingdoms. The fearfulness king subject. The fearfulness king subjects. The fearfulness king's dominion. The fearfulness king's dominions. The kingdom of fearfulness. The kingdoms of fearfulness. The kingdom of fearfulness. The fearfulness queen. The fearfulness queens. The fearfulness queendom. The fearfulness queendoms. The fearfulness queen subject. The fearfulness queen subjects. The fearfulness queen's dominion. The fearfulness queen's dominions. The queendom of fearfulness. The queendoms of fearfulness. The queendom of fearfulness. The fearfulness prince. The fearfulness princes. The fearfulness princedom. The fearfulness princedoms. The fearfulness prince's subject. The fearfulness prince's subjects. The fearfulness prince's dominion. The fearfulness prince's dominions. The princedom of fearfulness. The princedoms of fearfulness. The princedom of fearfulness. The fearfulness princess. The fearfulness princesses. The fearfulness princessdom. The fearfulness princessdoms. The fearfulness princess's subject. The fearfulness princess's subjects. The fearfulness princess's dominion. The fearfulness princess's dominions. The princessdom of fearfulness. The princessdoms of fearfulness. The princessdom of fearfulness. The lord of fearfulness. The lords of fearfulness. The lord of fearfulness. The lordess of fearfulness. The lordesses of fearfulness. The lordess of fearfulness. The priest of fearfulness. The priests of fearfulness. The priest of fearfulness. The priestess of fearfulness. The priestesses of fearfulness. The priestess of fearfulness. The ritual of fearfulness. The rituals of fearfulness. The ritual of fearfulness. The shrine of fearfulness. The shrines of fearfulness. The shrine of fearfulness. The temple of fearfulness. The temples of fearfulness. The temple of fearfulness. The leader of fearfulness. The leaders of fearfulness. The leader of fearfulness. The follower of fearfulness. The followers of fearfulness. The follower of fearfulness. The natural substance of fearfulness. The natural substances of fearfulness. The natural substance of fearfulness. The supernatural substance of fearfulness. The supernatural substances of fearfulness. The supernatural substance of fearfulness. The temporal substance of fearfulness. The temporal substances of fearfulness. The temporal substance of fearfulness. The spiritual substance of fearfulness. The spiritual substances of fearfulness. The spiritual substance of fearfulness. The natural form of fearfulness. The natural forms of fearfulness. The natural form of fearfulness. The supernatural form of fearfulness. The supernatural forms of fearfulness. The supernatural form of fearfulness. The temporal form of fearfulness. The temporal forms of fearfulness. The temporal form of fearfulness. The spiritual form of fearfulness. The spiritual forms of fearfulness. The spiritual form of fearfulness. The age of fearfulness. The ages of fearfulness. The age of fearfulness. The era of fearfulness. The eras of fearfulness. The era of fearfulness. The awakener of fearfulness. The awakeners of fearfulness. The awakener of fearfulness. The awakening of fearfulness. The awakenings of fearfulness. The awakening of fearfulness. The realm of fearfulness. The realms of fearfulness. The realm of fearfulness. The dimension of fearfulness. The dimensions of fearfulness. The dimension of fearfulness. The zone of fearfulness. The zones of fearfulness. The zone of fearfulness. The frequency of fearfulness. The frequencies of fearfulness. The frequency of fearfulness. The century of fearfulness. The centuries of fearfulness. The century of fearfulness. The millennium of fearfulness. The millenniums of fearfulness. The millennium of fearfulness. The purpose of fearfulness. The purposes of fearfulness. The purpose of fearfulness. The meaning of fearfulness. The meanings of fearfulness. The meaning of fearfulness. The culture of fearfulness. The cultures of fearfulness. The culture of fearfulness. The demonstrator of fearfulness. The demonstrators of fearfulness. The demonstrator of fearfulness. The demonstration of fearfulness. The demonstrations of fearfulness. The demonstration of fearfulness. The manifester of fearfulness. The manifestors of fearfulness. The manifester of fearfulness. The manifestation of fearfulness. The manifestations of fearfulness. The manifestation of fearfulness. The presence of fearfulness. The presences of fearfulness. The presence of fearfulness. The glow of fearfulness. The glows of fearfulness. The glow of fearfulness. The goal of fearfulness. The goals of fearfulness. The goal of fearfulness. The plan of fearfulness. The plans of fearfulness. The plan of fearfulness. The book of fearfulness. The books of fearfulness. The book of fearfulness. The philosopher of fearfulness. The philosophers of fearfulness. The philosopher of fearfulness. The philosophy of fearfulness. The philosophies of fearfulness. The philosophy of fearfulness. The releaser of fearfulness. The releasers of fearfulness. The releaser of fearfulness. The release of fearfulness. The releases of fearfulness. The release of fearfulness. The variable of fearfulness. The variables of fearfulness. The variable of fearfulness. The cause of fearfulness. The causes of fearfulness. The cause of fearfulness. The effect of fearfulness. The effects of fearfulness. The effect of fearfulness. The journey of fearfulness. The journeys of fearfulness. The journey of fearfulness. The emergence of fearfulness. The emergences of fearfulness. The emergence of fearfulness. The source of fearfulness. The sources of fearfulness. The source of fearfulness. The originator of fearfulness. The originators of fearfulness. The originator of fearfulness. The origin of fearfulness. The origins of fearfulness. The origin of fearfulness. The forefather of fearfulness. The forefathers of fearfulness. The forefather of fearfulness. The foremother of fearfulness. The foremothers of fearfulness. The foremother of fearfulness. The ancestor of fearfulness. The ancestors of fearfulness. The ancestor of fearfulness. The descendant of fearfulness. The descendants of fearfulness. The descendant of fearfulness. The lineage of fearfulness. The lineages of fearfulness. The lineage of fearfulness. The heritage of fearfulness. The heritages of fearfulness. The heritage of fearfulness. The heir of fearfulness. The heirs of fearfulness. The heir of fearfulness. The co-heir of fearfulness. The co-heirs of fearfulness. The co-heir of fearfulness. The joint heir of fearfulness. The joint heirs of fearfulness. The joint heir of fearfulness. The dynasty of fearfulness. The dynasties of fearfulness. The dynasty of fearfulness. The force of fearfulness. The forces of fearfulness. The force of fearfulness. The law of fearfulness. The laws of fearfulness. the law of fearfulness, the pact of fearfulness, the pacts of fearfulness, the pact of fearfulness, the game of fearfulness, the games of fearfulness, the game of fearfulness, the mask of fearfulness, the masks of fearfulness, the mask of fearfulness, the armor of fearfulness, the armors of fearfulness, the armor of fearfulness, the sword of fearfulness, the swords of fearfulness, the sword of fearfulness, the shield of fearfulness, the shields of fearfulness, the shield of fearfulness, the force shield of fearfulness, the force shields of fearfulness, the force shield of fearfulness, the armored force shield of fearfulness, the armored force shields of fearfulness, the armored force shield of fearfulness, the champion of fearfulness, the champions of fearfulness, the champion of fearfulness, the guardian of fearfulness, the guardians of fearfulness, the guardian of fearfulness, the defender of fearfulness, the defenders of fearfulness, the defender of fearfulness, the protector of fearfulness, the protectors of fearfulness, the protector of fearfulness, the chant of fearfulness, the chants of fearfulness, the chant of fearfulness, the shape of fearfulness, the shapes of fearfulness, the shape of fearfulness, the cube of fearfulness, the cubes of fearfulness, the cube of fearfulness, the cuboid of fearfulness, the cuboids of fearfulness, the cuboid of fearfulness, the sphere of fearfulness, the spheres of fearfulness, the sphere of fearfulness, the spheroid of fearfulness, the spheroids of fearfulness, the spheroid of fearfulness, the prism of fearfulness, the prisms of fearfulness, the prism of fearfulness, the pyramid of fearfulness, the pyramids of fearfulness, the pyramid of fearfulness, the cylinder of fearfulness, the cylinders of fearfulness, the cylinder of fearfulness, the cone of fearfulness, the cones of fearfulness, the cone of fearfulness, the triangle of fearfulness, the triangles of fearfulness, the triangle of fearfulness, the circle of fearfulness, the circles of fearfulness, the circle of fearfulness, the semicircle of fearfulness, the semicircles of fearfulness, the semicircle of fearfulness, the square of fearfulness, the squares of fearfulness, the square of fearfulness, the rectangle of fearfulness, the rectangles of fearfulness, the rectangle of fearfulness, the parallelogram of fearfulness, the parallelograms of fearfulness, the parallelogram of fearfulness, the rhombus of fearfulness, the rhombuses of fearfulness, the rhombus of fearfulness, the trapezoid of fearfulness, the trapezoids of fearfulness, the trapezoid of fearfulness, the polygon of fearfulness, the polygons of fearfulness, the polygon of fearfulness, the pentagon of fearfulness, the pentagons of fearfulness, the pentagon of fearfulness, the hexagon of fearfulness, the hexagons of fearfulness, the hexagon of fearfulness, the septagon of fearfulness, the septagons of fearfulness, the septagon of fearfulness, the octagon of fearfulness, the octagons of fearfulness, the octagon of fearfulness, the nonagon of fearfulness, the nonagons of fearfulness, the nonagon of fearfulness, the decagon of fearfulness, the decagons of fearfulness, the decagon of fearfulness, the evolution of fearfulness, the evolutions of fearfulness, the evolution of fearfulness, the revolution of fearfulness, the revolutions of fearfulness, the revolution of fearfulness, the elemental art of fearfulness, the elemental arts of fearfulness, the elemental art of fearfulness, the elemental science of fearfulness, the elemental sciences of fearfulness, the elemental science of fearfulness, the elemental principle of fearfulness, the elemental principles of fearfulness, the elemental principle of fearfulness, the elemental technology of fearfulness, the elemental technologies of fearfulness, the elemental technology of fearfulness, the low elemental art of fearfulness, the low elemental arts of fearfulness, the low elemental art of fearfulness, the low elemental science of fearfulness, The low elemental sciences of fearfulness. The low elemental science of fearfulness. The low elemental principle of fearfulness. The low elemental principles of fearfulness. The low elemental principle of fearfulness. The low elemental technology of fearfulness. The low elemental technologies of fearfulness. The low elemental technology of fearfulness. The high elemental art of fearfulness. The high elemental arts of fearfulness. The high elemental art of fearfulness. The high elemental science of fearfulness. The high elemental sciences of fearfulness. The high elemental science of fearfulness. The high elemental principle of fearfulness. The high elemental principles of fearfulness. The high elemental principle of fearfulness. The high elemental technology of fearfulness. The high elemental technologies of fearfulness. The high elemental technology of fearfulness. The agent of fearfulness. The agents of fearfulness. The agent of fearfulness. The agency of fearfulness. The agencies of fearfulness. The agency of fearfulness. The amplifier of fearfulness. The amplifiers of fearfulness. The amplifier of fearfulness. The amplification of fearfulness. The amplifications of fearfulness. The amplification of fearfulness. The enhancer of fearfulness. The enhancers of fearfulness. The enhancer of fearfulness. The enhancement of fearfulness. The enhancements of fearfulness. The enhancement of fearfulness. The magnifier of fearfulness. The magnifiers of fearfulness. The magnifier of fearfulness. The magnification of fearfulness. The magnifications of fearfulness. The magnification of fearfulness. The influencer of fearfulness. The influencers of fearfulness. The influencer of fearfulness. The influence of fearfulness. The influences of fearfulness. The influence of fearfulness. The emanator of fearfulness. The emanators of fearfulness. The emanator of fearfulness. The emanation of fearfulness. The emanations of fearfulness. The emanation of fearfulness. The converger of fearfulness. The convergers of fearfulness. The converger of fearfulness. The convergence of fearfulness. The convergences of fearfulness. The convergence of fearfulness. The aura of fearfulness. The auras of fearfulness. The aura of fearfulness. The impression of fearfulness. The impressions of fearfulness. The impression of fearfulness. The intelligence of fearfulness. The intelligences of fearfulness. The intelligence of fearfulness. The sophistication of fearfulness. The sophistications of fearfulness. The sophistication of fearfulness. The genius of fearfulness. The geniuses of fearfulness. The genius of fearfulness. The polymath of fearfulness. The polymaths of fearfulness. The polymath of fearfulness. The psychic of fearfulness. The psychics of fearfulness. The psychic of fearfulness. The knowledge of fearfulness. The knowledges of fearfulness. The knowledge of fearfulness. The understanding of fearfulness. The understandings of fearfulness. The understanding of fearfulness. The wisdom of fearfulness. The wisdoms of fearfulness. The wisdom of fearfulness. The secret of fearfulness. The secrets of fearfulness. The secret of fearfulness. The mystery of fearfulness. The mysteries of fearfulness. The mystery of fearfulness. The revelation of fearfulness. The revelations of fearfulness. The revelation of fearfulness. The tactic of fearfulness. The tactics of fearfulness. The tactic of fearfulness. The strategy of fearfulness. The strategies of fearfulness. The strategy of fearfulness. The strength of fearfulness. The strengths of fearfulness. The strength of fearfulness. The might of fearfulness. The mights of fearfulness. The might of fearfulness. The power of fearfulness. The powers of fearfulness. The power of fearfulness. The authority of fearfulness. The authorities of fearfulness. The authority of fearfulness. The dominion of fearfulness. The dominions of fearfulness. The dominion of fearfulness. The rhythm of fearfulness. The rhythms of fearfulness. The rhythm of fearfulness. The melody of fearfulness. The melodies of fearfulness. The melody of fearfulness. The music of fearfulness. The musics of fearfulness. The music of fearfulness. The lyric of fearfulness. The lyrics of fearfulness. The lyric of fearfulness. The song of fearfulness. The songs of fearfulness. The song of fearfulness. The dance of fearfulness. The dances of fearfulness. The dance of fearfulness. The spirit of fearfulness. The spirits of fearfulness. The spirit of fearfulness. The soul of fearfulness. The souls of fearfulness. The soul of fearfulness. The body of fearfulness. The bodies of fearfulness. The body of fearfulness. The mark of fearfulness. The marks of fearfulness. The mark of fearfulness. The promise of fearfulness. The promises of fearfulness. The promise of fearfulness. The visionary of fearfulness. The visionaries of fearfulness. The visionary of fearfulness. The vision of fearfulness. The visions of fearfulness. The vision of fearfulness. The picture of fearfulness. The pictures of fearfulness. The picture of fearfulness. The sound of fearfulness. The sounds of fearfulness. The sound of fearfulness. The dung of fearfulness. The dungs of fearfulness. The dung of fearfulness. The language of fearfulness. The languages of fearfulness. The language of fearfulness. The communication of fearfulness. The communications of fearfulness. The communication of fearfulness. The people of fearfulness. The peoples of fearfulness. The people of fearfulness. The society of fearfulness. The societies of fearfulness. The society of fearfulness. The fortress of fearfulness. The fortresses of fearfulness. The fortress of fearfulness. The government of fearfulness. The governments of fearfulness. The government of fearfulness. The city of fearfulness. The cities of fearfulness. The city of fearfulness. The nation of fearfulness. The nations of fearfulness. The nation of fearfulness. The civilization of fearfulness. The civilizations of fearfulness. The civilization of fearfulness. The world of fearfulness. The worlds of fearfulness. The world of fearfulness.